Well, this ain't good. It didn't shut off or overheat or anything, but I lost all coolant. And looking from underneath here, it looks like it's coming from underneath there. It don't look like it's spraying out of any of my hoses or anything, but this is probably not. Hey folks, so today I thought I was going to show you my absolute brilliance at taking Sprinter turbos out and intakes off. But the video turned into much more than that, and we had some complications that I've never seen over the 60 to 80 or 90 that I've done of these things. The problems that I had on this particular van was unlike any others that I've ever had in the past. So check this out. We're going to talk about removing the turbo. We're going to talk about the problems that I had, and it becomes a complete shit show. I mean, nothing pales in comparison to this. It just was insane. So let me tell you, like I said before, I've done quite a few of these. These turbos can come out. No, they're not simple to get out. They seem simple once you get them out and you're like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad if all of your bolts come out. But that wasn't the case in this situation. So first thing that we've got this laid out on the floor here so you folks can see it. First thing we have to remove is the heat shield that's on the top of there. And then that exposes 3 bolts that need to come out of the back of the turbo. Them 3 bolts affix to this pipe right here. Which then brings us to El Problemo number 1. When you purchase your kit from me, you get these bolts and these bolts. Well, if you take a quick gander at these bolts, which could be in the same bag, they're 2 different lengths. Now, the only place that holds 3 bolts the same are back here on the turbo. And these bolts will go in there and tighten down. So these guys that didn't know any better before me put these bolts in here instead of these shorter bolts in here. And what happens is they need to torque these things down, and they will go in there and they will tighten down. But what will happen is they'll mushroom on the inside of here, which causes them to get very, very tight. And somebody stripped off the head for this. Now, it's definitely not an easy place to get in and work because your ratchet is up behind the cylinder and you're up against the firewall and you need lots of leverage. So that means you need to use a really long ratchet to try to break these bolts free because they're super tight. So first I tried the correct socket for doing that, which is called E-sockets. You can often get on these bolts with 10 millimeters regular sockets, or you can use the correct socket, which I like to use because I have it. It wasn't coming out that way, and it just started stripping. So then I pulled out one of these out of my bag of tricks. That was stripping off too. I was buried into this thing for quite a bit of time. I had already taken the other 2 bolts out, but I couldn't get this particular one off. So then my wife recommended taking the inductor tool and heating up the head. Well, I knew that would heat up the head and probably would not help me, but I tried it anyways because I thought it was a pretty good idea and I hadn't tried it yet. So then I went to the grinder. This is a Sprinter turbo. This is what happens when you let someone work on a Sprinter turbo that does crack. They will strip off the bolts because they're doing crack. Then they won't come out. Don't let the mechanics that work on your Sprinter turbo do crack. So now we had all 3 of the bolts loose on the back pipe. Y'all didn't see it happen, but that was a pain in the ass because I tried lots of things before I just ground the head of it off, and I should have just ground the head of it off to begin with. Income problem number 2. Then we had these bolts, which are generally 7 millimeter bolts. Well, they started out 6 millimeter, now they're 7 millimeter. And they had put the wrong length bolts inside here too, on this one right here. This one just snapped off from heat. Both of these bolts snapped off. So then I had to extract them things out of there, and because that was crammed down in there, that was a complete shit show. Now we're into this thing for almost a day because I'm trying not to break any of these parts because they're super expensive if you need to replace them. So we can't break them. Finally got them bolts broken off to get the exchange pipe, which is the EGR. I believe this is the EGR cooling pipe. That was a complete crap show too. Not as bad as the other one, but still a crap show nonetheless. Once you get this pipe off, and once you get this pipe off, then you can get to the 3 bolts that are holding on the down pipe right here. Well, this bolt was stripped off as well, which is in a very, very bad place. And I tried everything, once again, going through my steps of using the proper socket, trying the extractor head socket, everything that I could think of, this wouldn't come off. Eventually what ended up happening was I used one of these extractors along with something that I haven't used in years, which is a pneumatic impact. Luckily I have the stubby version because there's no room to work down inside there. I was able to get that bolt out. I'm a process type of guy, so I try to do what should be done and the way it should work first, and then when I get stopped I go to the next thing. The last thing I want to do is start grinding and cutting things and trying weirdo stuff, you know. Heat, I don't want to put heat down there because I don't want to catch things on fire. There could be oil, there could be fuel, all of these things going on. So heat's not really an option very often in these particular situations. I honestly thought at this point I was pretty much, you know, past the bad stuff, because I've done lots of these and I've had similar problems, generally not on the same vehicle, but I've had similar problems on a multiple types of vehicle. But this next one, I could have never, ever been ready for. Problem number 4. Now I need to get down to actually taking the bolts out of the intake, which I have never, ever, ever had an issue taking these bolts out. Yeah, sure, there's stuff in the way. There's all sorts of wires, all sorts of fuel lines and different things going on, but never have I ever had trouble getting these bolts out. This side, all the bolts came out fine. This side, all of these bolts came out fine until it was to these bolts, which are generally, actually, even though they're in the back, are the easier to get out of the way because you've got your pedestal that's out of the way, you got everything out of the way. This bolt came out really hard, and I looked down on it, and some electrolysis had occurred because this bolt is steel and the head is aluminum. So you're gonna have electrolysis in that situation. But this bolt wouldn't budge. I mean, wouldn't come out for nothing. I tried everything that I could possibly think of to get it out. I mean, it would not turn. I was able to put well over 100 pounds of pressure on the head, and eventually I stripped the head off of the bolt. So then I just go, okay, well, piss on it. We're gonna take the grinder and we're gonna grind that head of that bolt off there. This is why I instruct you folks to always have a lighter ready, because you never know when you're gonna have to set something on fire. And this thing is about ready to be set on fire. Because I wanted as much room to work as possible, I cut the center pipe that goes between these two. And this piece of plumbing pipe runs from one side to the other side. So I took me old trusty Sawzall and I cuts it down the center so I could remove this one intake right here. That allowed me to get my grinder up in there and grind the head of the bolt off. And just so you guys know, if you think these are new intakes, these are actually intakes that I rebuild down here at the Clayway. So if you ever need your intakes rebuilt, they look like total complete crap when they show up. And usually they leave out the door looking very similar to these. But the biggest thing is all of this is clean. The inside of it is clean. You could eat off the inside of this thing. And these things had over 400,000 miles on them, and it can make the swirl flaps work all again like they're supposed to. So if you wouldn't need that done, send them to me. That's my plug. Anyways, I removed this one so I could get to the back side of this one with the grinder and grind that off, and I was left with a humongous stud sticking out. So I'm thinking to myself, Well, I don't have all the parts to reassemble this thing, so I just let that stud go out of my mind. And I just figured it's 2 or 3 inches long, so I'm going to weld a nut onto it, or I'm just going to take a pair of vice grips and pull it out. I mean, looking at this stud, I would have never in a million years thought that this was even going to be a problem. I didn't put any more thought into it. I didn't think in a million years I wouldn't be able to get that thing out. Brother, I was wrong. That was harder than anything that I had done before. Fast forward to a couple of days later, I've got the intake flaps clean, I've got everything working, I've got it assembled, I've got it ready to go in, and when I went to put it up in there, I remembered that stud. I tried different types of penetrants, and nothing was seeming to loosen this thing up. After spraying it down with some penetrant, I took a pick tool and tried to pick the electrolysis out of the back base portion of the stud. So then I took one of these easy outs, put it on the stud. I thought, these things have never failed me. No problem. We're going to get that thing off. But I even tried that on the head when I had a good head on it, and it wouldn't come loose then either. So then I'm like, I'll drop 2 nuts on it, use the back nut to unscrew the stud. No problem. As long as I didn't mess up the threads. Now, some of you are going to think I'm a real dumbass because I'm a process guy. I'm going to do the least impactful thing first and then go down the line to the things that I know I should have done. And sometimes I end up getting to what I should have done in the first place actually works, but I try all this stuff first because it's how I do things. It's how I survive. It's how I figure things out. It's just me. I'm not running a retail repair shop, so I don't have to do it as quick as you do it in the shop. But then again, let's make some interesting content. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. You should have welded a nut on it to begin with. Well, the problem is there's diesel fuel and oil all over this engine, and I really was hesitant to actually weld a nut on there. But I ended up welding 4 nuts on there, got excellent penetration on 3 of the 4 nuts. The first one, not so much so, and tried turning it out. Nothing was doing. It wasn't turning out. This is freaking unbelievable. This bolt is supposed to be torqued down to 9 foot-pounds. And to prove that I had great penetration, that is part of the tip of the bolt that came off as I turned it out. This thing is freaking crazy. I don't think I'm going to be able to get this thing out. I'm not sure what the hell. So now I'm going to take a flapper wheel and protect the surface of my cylinder head, and I'm going to grind the little nub that's left after breaking off 4 nuts off of there and flatten it out and then drill it. After taking my center punch and making a center punch mark in there, I take my 1/16 drill bit and I'm going to start drilling through the center. Now, you folks that don't know me, you can't tell, but, or maybe you should. I'm wearing Coke bottles on my face. I am blind as a bat. And even though this thing is a little bit of a ways down inside there, I'm not going to be able to see this. I mean, my mark looks like it's off. I can tell you that I end up making a pretty center hole with my 1/16 drill bit. But that was only because I put my phone up there, magnified it, and got to where I could see the center of the hole pretty well. So now we're going to try this process and see if we can start easy out in this thing or drill it out till we can re-tap it out or something. But this is a cylinder head. I'm not interested in taking the cylinder head off, so I don't have time for it. I'm not paid for it. It's not going to happen. Okay, so I got that fairly center, I think. Now, I didn't know at this point of what I was doing that them tool marks were there. I hadn't noticed that somebody must have had some problem before this because I had an enormous stud sticking out. And I was very careful not to touch my surfaces. But somebody else wasn't as careful as old Clayboy. Careful up until this frickin' point where I frickin' broke off the frickin' drill bit down inside the hole, which was what I was afraid of. Now I can't step up to the 1/8 drill bit like I wanted to. Okay, my drill bit broke off about 10 millimeters down inside the hole, so I ended up stepping it up to a 1/8 drill bit. Then that allowed me to use an extractor. And I've got an extractor, a snap-on extractor that I'm going to use with my ratchet and my socket. That goes in there really well, But my concern is the hole that I'm going to break the extractor off there, because I can't get the hole small enough, or the extractor is just going to slip like it did. Okay, so we've got our easy out stuck in there, and we're going to try to hit it. We've got great, it's grabbing really good, but it ain't turning out. Is it, babe?
I don't think so.
That thing grabbed on really good, and these are the best easy outs that you can buy. So here's what happened. When I broke through to the other side of the stud with this 1/16 drill bit, it actually broke off. So I've got a full carbide, and I mean completely carbide, not carbide coated drill bit that I'm going to try to drill through that other drill bit and go all the way through this stud. At least that's the hopes. Keep your fingers crossed. Pull that turtle head back up. We'll see what happens. Well, that wouldn't work because this drill bit is so small that the carbide drill bit didn't have enough bite on the tip of it to drill through it. Now, I can't seem to figure out what the hell they did to make this thing so tight, because obviously it's not coming out with an easy out, but I see these tool marks here, which tells me that something has been done to this, and I don't know what, but whatever they did is making that stay inside there. Even that carbide bit wouldn't go through that 1/16 drill bit because it's so small, it really didn't have any cutting surface to go through. And plus, I was heating it up, so I was machine hardening the inside of that bolt, so I couldn't get through that drill bit. But it really didn't matter because I had 10 millimeters of depth. So one would think that I could take a flat tap and tap out the hole, because the hole is 6 millimeters. That means I only need 9 millimeters of depth, because the rule of thumb in machining is that anything over 1.5 times the depth of the thread is overkill. So you would only need 9 millimeters of depth for it to be secure and you're able to torque it down. But because I don't have any flat taps, I can't do that, because the tip of the tap is 4 to 5 millimeters by itself to start making the threads. The other issue is I only have about a 4 millimeter hole in it at best. So the only thing I could do is drill down that 10 millimeters, making the hole 6 millimeters. But then I'm going to have some studs stuck off down inside that hole, so my bolt is going to bottom out. And I don't know if I can make it bigger, because I might drill into a cavity like an oil cavity or coolant cavity and create even more problems. So now I need to start looking at it from a different perspective and figure out a different fix that I'm certain will work, that doesn't require me to pull the head off. Plus, I called my friend Dave and I talked to him, and he said, well, how much is it going to cost to pull the head? And I said, well, I don't know. I've never pulled one before. But I can't imagine it's all that cheap, nor is it something that I have time to do, because it's going to take me another week between figuring it out and pulling the head off and getting all the parts for a Sprinter that comes from Germany, because everything's so special and Germany's so special. Zinteilungeigen. The Germans. Okay, so we need to hold this edge down flush with the engine. I have an idea. It's really bollocksed up my day. Now, I've spent 8 hours today meticulously going from step to step to step to step, everything that's in my ability to do. I can't get that stinking thing out. I wanted to show you folks the other side of my shop. We have CNC lathes down here. We have CNC machines. We have Bridgeports. We have everything here. And if I'm not knowledgeable enough to do something, the guys that work out here every single day certainly are. And we did everything that we could possibly think of. So I presume if I take that big hole right there and I tap that out to 1/2 inch, because that's just a locator pin hole, goes to nothing. There's nothing that goes in there. It just is wide open when you put the intake on. I think that I can use that hole to secure down this edge, and I'm hoping that, even though you're probably not a mechanic, that makes sense. It's kind of cobbly, but I don't know what else to do other than ship it out and take it to another shop and let them pull the head, because I'm not doing that. As I'm looking at it, I think I can make a bracket that goes over the end of the intake to make sure it holds it down evenly and squarely through both bolts. But I don't normally do hacky von hacky stuff like this, but I don't know any other solution than to pull the head off. So if one of you do, that would be great. But right now, I don't know. Okay, so the idea behind this is I'm not affecting anything mechanically. What I'm going to do can be undone if necessary and taken somewhere and fixed properly if necessary. We'll just have to wait and see. So stay tuned, Spidey fans. We've got something in store for you. What I'm about to show you folks is a either dash of brilliance, a lot of ignorance, and possibly even some dumb stuff. I've been all of them things. So I went down to the local Home Depot and picked up a 1/2 inch, 1.5 inch long, 20 thread bolt. I took that bolt, I cut it down, I ground the head down, I tapped out the inside of the bolt to 8 by 1.25 millimeters. Now the depth of any time you're installing a bolt, the depth of the hole does not need to be over 1.5 times the size of the bolt itself. So we've got an 8 millimeter bolt, 1.5 times the depth of the thread. Anything over 12 millimeters is going to be overkill and wasteful. So we didn't have to go down super deep with this, even though we put this thing down on the Bridgeport and we ended up making these threads. We need to be able to lock this down inside the large hole on the cylinder head, and this will hold a bracket that will come over the outside of it, and the bracket will be threaded as well, which will push down on the corner, making the other hole that was inside there obsolete. Now, you and I both know that if this was at any other shop, this head would be coming off. They wouldn't care if it cost $3,000, $5,000, $6,000. It wouldn't matter. We're not doing anything to this vehicle that cannot be undone. We're not, I don't know, JB welding bolts into place or whatever epoxy they use to hold this bolt down that would make it impossible to come out or machine, because I don't have a cylinder head. I can't say how much bigger I can go with that hole, how deep I can go with that hole, if there's cooling jackets near it. I have none of that to my disposal. So I had to use what was there, and luckily there was a big ass stud there for probably some other kind of setup that Mercedes has for putting an intake on this thing, would be my guess is why that's there, or it's part to help mold the process for the engine block or cylinder head. I don't know. But anyways, we're going to use this hole and we're going to make this intake bolt down, secure down, and be able to be removed, other than the guys that laughed. The last ones that worked on this, I'll guarantee you, they were laughing like, oh, it's going to be so funny. The next person ain't going to get this out. I wish it would have been you, you son of a bee. And because I've tapped that out, I can screw that Allen head down inside here, and then I'll put an 8 millimeter bolt on the top of that to hold my tap. And then I'll also put a bolt in there that I can thread into the bracket, which will push down onto the surface of the intake. I take my insert and I screw it down there and try to get it close to the surface. Okay, during the mock-up, I throw my intake inside there and size up both pieces and see if it looks right, which it does. And I needed to put my turbo pedestal in there to make sure that my bolt head was not going to interfere with the pedestal placement of the turbo when I go to reassemble it. Okay, so we've got our bracket in there. We've got all of our bolts torqued down on this intake right here. And we're going to torque down that bolt right there to about 9 foot-pounds, 18 Newton meters. and hopefully that presses on our intake. We'll see you guys when it's running, I hope. Now I've had it running for about 45 minutes to an hour, drove it around a bit. She's good to go. So here's what we do.
All right, now we're gonna do the clayway dance, Joy. You put your hands on your hips. Go. Oop, 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 oop.
Fast forward an hour and a half later, about 30 miles. Well, this ain't good. It didn't shut off or overheat or anything, but I lost all coolant. And looking from underneath here, it looks like it's coming from underneath there. It don't look like it's spraying out of any of my hoses or anything, but this is probably not good. Well, unfortunately, I don't need to pull out the crack lighter or anything and start doing stuff that I shouldn't be doing. But check this out. Excellent news, sir. Just me not paying attention to what I was doing. Oh my gosh. It was just a hose that I didn't put the clamp on. And then I had a problem with the exchange pipe after I fixed that. But that wasn't a big deal. I mean, even though it took me a little while to figure out a process to put on this other hose that was on the EGR valve, blah, blah, blah. Needless to say, this guy's van, his intakes aren't leaking. He's not leaking oil any longer. Cooler's in there, and she's good to go. We drove it back to Indiana. Dave, I hope you appreciate what I did. I know you paid me to do it, but I did the best I can. And from what I understand, he's not having a problem with that. But now he's having a problem with his oil level rising up, which I'm assuming is the injector's leaking down and he's getting too much blow-by through his rings. It's just a guess. I don't know. I don't know what the scenario is there yet. But I didn't mess with any of that stuff, so I don't have to worry about that too much. I hope this video was interesting for you folks. Share it. Share the clayway. Consider joining. Remember, if you got a question for me, I can't help you with that old baby mama drama. And I definitely don't smoke crack. That's why I make jokes about it all the time. Because people do it, I guess. I don't know. I got these for melting solder. Anyways, look me up on the clayway. If you got a question for me, I answer them for absolutely free. God bless, folks. Remember, don't be the next to them. Be the very first to you. And if anyone else can do it, I promise you, you can do it too. You just got to have a little patience and resolve.